million people worldwide, a staggering figure when you consider that the Earth's population at the time is believed to have been between 350 and 430 million people. In London alone, over 30,000 of the total population of 70,000 people died of the infection. The 1665 outbreak took as many as 100,000 Londoners, about 15% of the city's total population. Bubonic plague is a bacterial infection that's spread through contact with the bodily fluids of an infected person or animal, yuck, inhaling a cough or sneeze droplet from an infected person or animal, although this is more common with pneumonic plague, or when the lungs become infected, or being bitten by an infected flea. Given the mechanisms for catching bubonic plague, outbreaks tend to spread like wildfire among people living in densely populated areas and areas with low levels of sanitation. The infection is called bubonic because it causes an infected person's buboes, or lymph nodes, to grow swollen lumps which ultimately turn black, hence the name Black Death. The nodes are found in the armpit, neck, and groin. Bubonic plague comes from the bacterium known as Yersinia pestis, or Y. pestis, and boy is Y. pestis a nasty sort. Its victims' symptoms include headaches, abdomen, arm, and leg pain, sudden onset of a fever and chills, those disgusting swollen lumps and lymph nodes we spoke about, and, if the plague is pneumonic, blackened bones. Although bubonic plague is quite deadly, there is some good news. With the advent of antibacterial drugs and penicillin, it can now be easily treated. In our modern, sanitized world, cases are also rare. For example, according to the Cleveland Clinic, the US sees an average of about only 7 cases per year. But people in the 14th and 17th centuries weren't so lucky because medical science was, by today's standards, primitive. In 1348, London was plagued by, well, the plague, and trade was the main culprit behind its spread. The outbreak is believed to have started in Central Asia sometime in the early 1330s. The exact location of the disease's genesis is most likely modern-day Kyrgyzstan. Because the Silk Road trade route ran through Kyrgyzstan, traders encountered Y. pestis en route to ships chartered for Europe. In a cruel twist of irony, Y. pestis' original host may have been the cute and fluffy marmot. These adorable little fellows are known carriers of the bacteria. The connection between the traders and the marmot is best left to the imagination. But researchers have sort of ruined our fun thinking of marmot man love. Researchers believe that what probably happened is the marmot passed infected fleas onto a rodent that makes regular contact with both marmots and humans, rats. Basically, infected fleas jump from the marmot onto the rat. The fleas bite the rat and thus infect it. Once the rat dies from an infection, the fleas find a new host, humans. Black Death swept through Asia, laying waste to the Eastern Roman and Mongol empires. Ignorant as to their role in the outbreak, traders continued to load up their ships with goods obtained on the Silk Road. Aboard those ships were stowaways, infected rats. Soon, ships crewed by infected sailors began arriving in Mediterranean and European ports. Ghost ships, or vessels whose sailors had all died of the plague, also made their way to port. The great mortality had arrived on the shores of Europe and was rapidly finding its way to London. In 2020, the world's medical community, with its highly sophisticated detection and treatment methods, wasn't fully prepared to combat COVID-19, at least at first. But ultimately, modern medicine, as we know it, helped mankind beat the pandemic. In 1348, England's primitive, by today's standards, medical community was quickly bewildered and overwhelmed by bubonic plague. The hot, wet summer of 1348 created the perfect environment for Y. pestis to thrive, and a lack of understanding of how to prevent and treat the disease meant the death toll would continue to rise. Frightened Londoners sought religious guidance. After all, they reasoned, Black Death must be some kind of divine punishment. Prayers and even self-flagellation were employed to end the pandemic, but nothing seemed to stop bubonic plague from claiming more victims. Even the wealthy and powerful weren't spared from the great mortality. King Edward II's own daughter was taken by Black Death. To avoid more of their ranks succumbing to the disease, power players fled in droves. As death carts rolled around the city to the familiar cry of, "Bring out your dead," those with means escaped London. Those fleeing London inadvertently brought the plague with them, causing the outbreak to spread far and wide. Now, nowhere was safe from Black Death. Mercifully, the outbreak in London ended in 1350. However, smaller outbreaks continued to pop up over the next 300 years. Then came the outbreak of 1665. The 17th century outbreak appears to have started in China and made its way to Europe via a ship from Amsterdam carrying cotton. In the spring of 1665, 2 French weavers working on London's Drury Lane fell ill. The weavers exhibited swollen buboes. It became abundantly clear bubonic plague was back in London. 17th century London was far from hygienic, and the lack of sanitation caused the plague to spread at breakneck speed. Flea-ridden rats scurried through trash and human waste, causing the outbreak to grow wider and wider. The body count continued to rise. Those who could, including King Charles II, left London so quickly they caused heads to spin. But brave government officials and clergy members stayed behind to tend to the city's poorest, those who had no means of escape. Taking advantage of those desperate to prevent or cure the horrid disease, plague doctors made their way through the streets of London, selling faux cures that, in some cases, actually increased the pain of the already suffering. Authorities who remained behind instituted martial law. Houses of the infected were marked by red crosses on their doors. Public meetings were forbidden. Plague victims and their families could be locked in homes for a period of 40 days, with sentries placed at their door to ensure no one broke curfew. Searchers were deployed to find corpses and alert the plague carts. By autumn of 1665, the plague began to die out. The cold weather killed off many rodents and their free-riding fleas. In September of 1666, the plague was in its final throes, when the massive destruction caused by the Great Fire of London landed a final punch. Many buildings and dwellings burned to the ground, killing large numbers of rodents. While bubonic plague may have taken its last victim in 1679, by 1666, the mass spread had basically stopped. Londoners could breathe a sigh of relief. In both the 1348 and 1665 outbreaks, dead bodies piled up, sometimes even spilling out into the streets. Plague carts made their way through London, collecting the dead off the streets and imploring households to bring out their dead for disposal. But where did the bodies go? London authorities designated areas throughout the city to serve as plague pits. These 9-foot-deep mass graves were filled with cadavers. Sometimes those buried had not yet expired, an even more horrible end for victims already in agony. In a morbid sense, the plague pits achieved a certain type of equality. The bodies of the wealthy and powerful lay next to corpses of London's poorest. Now let's explore. It's here where the French weavers were purported to be the first victims of the 1665 outbreak. Although there are no ghost stories about Drury Lane directly stemming from the plague, the Drury Lane Theatre, which was built shortly before the plague, is widely purported to be haunted. The spirit of a man whose dress may be from the 17th century has been spotted. He appears to be rushing towards the theater, perhaps eternally seeking to catch a show that ended centuries ago. Charterhouse Square boasts over 700 years of history and is believed to be the largest plague pit to have existed. Here, bodies from the 14th century outbreak were buried in a unique pattern. They were stacked in 2 rows. In 2015, it was discovered that under this park, over 50,000 plague victims are engaged in eternal slumber. Visitors who press an ear on the stones over the pit report the sound of wailing and moaning. Your host can attest to this. When I stood over the pit while shooting our walk, I heard some strange, unfamiliar, and eerie sounds, like many voices softly crying out in agony. Although the house itself was rebuilt during the Tudor era, the outside wall dates back to the 14th century. Fun fact, John Houghton was the priory of Charterhouse when Henry VIII demanded submission of all Catholics. Houghton's refusal to swear such an oath led to his being condemned as a traitor. After being hung, drawn, and quartered, Houghton's severed arm was hanged on the wall, a threat to others who might defy King Henry. A translucent man has been spotted walking around the wall. Some believe this may be Houghton, perhaps searching for meaning in the afterlife. We have a special guest with us today. This poor gentleman is a victim of the 14th century outbreak. Notice his blackened bones, a lasting reminder of the power and terror of Black Death. Thank you so very much for watching. If you like this video, please consider giving it a like, and please consider subscribing to our channel. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next walk.